So we have two speakers. Unfortunately, Rose is not able to join us today, but we have two excellent speakers who are going to look at some of these issues from different perspectives. And our first speaker is a futurist, an inventor, and an author, and he is Perttu Pölönen from Finland. He's also a composer, and in the Finnish media, he's been called a gentle highbrow and a fearless inventor. He himself still prefers not to use titles at all. It's difficult to put him into any known box, he says. He's a classically trained composer by education, but he became an entrepreneur at a young age. He studied at Singularity University, which is a think tank located at the NASA Ames Research Center in California. And while in California, he co-founded a non-profit that develops AR apps for the education sector in developing countries. And the company is run and operated in Myanmar. And Perttu's own invention is something called MusiClock, which is an example of how a personal challenge can be turned into an internationally awarded and patented invention. And I hope, Perttu, you'll tell us a bit more about MusiClock. The MusiClock mobile app became the #1 music app in over 10 countries. And in 2014, Perttu was given the Most Creative Finn Award, which is quite an achievement for one of Europe's, possibly Europe's most creative countries. So to be the most creative Finn is a tremendous achievement. And in 2018, the MIT Tech Review honored him among 35 innovators under 35 in Europe. And he's written 2 books, Future Skills and Future Identities. So over to you, Perttu.
Thank you very much for the kind, very nice long introduction. My name is Perttu, just simply Perttu, without any titles. And I'm going to talk to you about future skills. Now, let's go to history. Let's start with what kind of changes we've had in the past, because we need to understand them in order to see the direction we're going to. Now, tens of thousands of years ago, what was the first big change in our society, or not society, but in our everyday lives? What was the first era? From hunter-gatherers, what happened? We got agricultural revolution, and it brought with that a new type of worker, right? So if you had been born that time, what would have you become as an adult? Well, you would have been farmer in one way or another. Most of us were working on the farms, in the fields, in the barns. Now, when technology advanced, it of course replaced us, as it always does. That's the point of technology. You know, we are not very good with our capabilities, so we need tools that help us. For example, our eyes. We cannot see to other galaxies, right? So that's why we need to invent a telescope. We cannot see to cell level, so that's why we invent a microscope, and so on. So technology kind of outperformed us, as it was supposed to do. And we did not need farmers that much anymore. So we had to find something new. So the work was replaced. Now, because of the technological advancement, where did we go? What was the second revolution that we had? Because of the machines and the rise of them, we got industrial revolution. Now, where did all these people move to? So what was the next kind of archetype worker? What became normal now? If you had been born to that time, what would have you become as an adult? Now, we were factory workers. That was the common thing to do. But as technology again advanced, it was quite clear what it did to factory workers. The machines, they were faster, they were cheaper, they were more effective, they didn't make many mistakes like humans did. So again, it was clear game. Okay, we need to move on because we can't beat those machines. So the third revolution, this is the one that we're living in right now. What is it? So if you look around, what is unique for our time? Something that we've never had before. So what is the era we're living in right now? We are in the information revolution. Thanks to Google, thanks to internet, there's more access to information than ever before, and pretty much all different aspects of our lives are, well, information depends on that. So what are we? So in one word, how would you describe, the archetype worker of today? Even though we have different titles, we have very different jobs and professions, what is common for all of these people? Who are we? We are information professionals now. So basically what we do for a living is that we just manage information, we handle information. If you take some layers out, it's just Excels and PowerPoints and emails and messages. It's editing, sending, reporting, analyzing. It's just managing information. Of course, if you are a teacher, there's a certain way you're expected to handle that information. You have pedagogues, you have methods, you teach. If you are a doctor, your job is to handle the information so that you can make analysis and diagnosis and. But we all just handle information for a living. It's quite plain in a way. And in this time, in information revolution, the quality of your thinking is the quality of your work. Because it's all about how are you able to use that information for your benefit. So what do you get out of these resources? How creative are you? How persistent are you? How cross-disciplinary are you? So we are information professionals. But what will happen next is the same thing that has happened before. So because technology will advance, again, it will take a job out of us. Because what is the technology that I'm talking about right now? So what is very good with information? Well, obviously AI, algorithms, computers. So they will handle all the handling of that information. They are very good at that. They're analytical, they're fast, they're effective, they're rational, they have very good logic, reasoning skills. So obviously, we are not going to beat them in the long run. So they're going to kick us forward. We have to move forward. Now the question is, where are we going? So what is the next revolution? What do you think is the natural continuation for this development? What is it? And remember, this is just a guess. Nobody knows this, obviously. But what do you think? I would say it's human revolution. Because the more technological we'll become as a society, the more humane we also should become. And right now, it doesn't look like that. Technology has went up very fast. We haven't really been able to keep up. And now we see there are some signals. It's not looking good. But humane elements, what do you have that not any machine, algorithm, or computer can't have? Well, you have personality, you have a character. That's the difference between machines. So that's the added value that you can bring into the workplace. So the question is, what do we have at the end of the day that's only unique for us? Human revolution. Well, what would be the archetype worker of the future? What is the word we can now come up with that would describe the jobs that we won't even know yet? Something like this, I would say. Creative problem solver. So problems won't go away. That's pretty clear. We will always have problems. So work, I wouldn't be afraid of that. But the problems we'll have in 2040, 50, 60, it's probably quite different than what we have right now. And with new problems, we need new thinking, creativity. Now, if you look at the kind of nutshell of the evolution of work here, you can make a rule of thumb, which is that we have developed from the muscles to the head, and from head to the heart. This is how it has gone. So muscles was the resource. In the field, it was strength, physical work. If you didn't have muscles and strength, you couldn't really help much. There was no use for you. But machines outperformed our muscles. Okay, so now we have to move to the head. Let's, send kids to schools. Education system is being born, right? Cities, industrial world. And now the head is important. And we still are in the world where head is everything. When you go to a job interview, this is what you try to kind of show, that you remember a lot of stuff. You have gone to different schools. You have a lot of degrees. But in the future, it's not enough. You or internet. Which one wins? You or the Google? Which one? So we have to get the heart, the context, understanding what's the bigger picture, the knowledge of the heart, so to say. Now, every time this has happened, we have tried to oppose the change. We've tried to slow it down. We've said that it's not possible, it's not going to take my job. But every time technology has kind of forced us to move forward, it has also forced us to educate ourselves more. It has forced us to become a bit better. So that's a good thing, I would say. What is difficult here is that it will happen faster than before. How long did agricultural revolution last? How long did we have that era? Well, for thousands of years. What about industrial? Hundreds of years. What about information? Just decades, right? So it will happen in one lifetime. This is what might make it a bit difficult for us. But I'm optimistic. This is a good trend. This is a good direction to go to, right? So let's make it happen. Now the question is then, if we have to kind of compare ourselves to machines, we need to understand very well how we differ from them. So if, let's say, a 5-year-old asks you, how am I different? How would you explain this? Because this is fundamentally important for all of us, but especially for the children to understand. So how do these machines function? Now let's go back to basics. What do computers need? Well, first of all, electricity and iron, right? Okay. But after that, what kind of information is, good for computers? What's their favorite food? They like information that is exact, very well defined, in other words. So if I say 10 or square root 16 or 73%, that's universal. We can't argue about that. That's exact, that's very well defined. But if I say words that are not well defined, let's say I say good or bad, beautiful or ugly or a lot, a little, these type of words are not universal. It depends a lot on the context. So let's go through an example. If I told you that, let's say, there is 10 blueberries in this glass, everybody would understand what I'm talking about. But if I told you there's a lot of blueberries here, you would still know what I'm talking about. You could even imagine what it looks like. But if I told a computer there's a lot of blueberries here, the computer would get a bit, baffled. Like, but what is a lot? Is it like 16 or 700? Or is it 73% or square root 60? Like, what is a lot? So it's a bit more difficult question to answer. Like, what's the context? Or if I told you, let's say, there's an ant running on the floor, and the ant jumps on this podium, you would all know that ant cannot jump on the podium. Even though it's strong, still impossible. If I told the computer the same thing, an ant is running and jumps on the podium, and how does a computer approach this situation? Because they don't have intuition. They don't have imagination. They've never played with ants in the forest when they were young, right? They don't have that. So they have to calculate everything because that's the way they think. So firstly, they have to know all the parameters here. What's the size of the ant? What's the length of the arm? What's the muscle energy, right? What's the jumping technique? What's the height of the podium? Everything, the angle. And when they have the parameters, they can form the function, and then they calculate, well, an ant can jump 1.1732756 centimeters, which is less than the height of the podium, which means answer is negative, it can't jump. So even though humans and computers both got the same answer, which is the right, correct answer, we still got there with very different thinking. The process was completely opposite. And this is crucial to understand. All the tasks, the jobs, the things in the future where you need to take into consideration, for example, culture. You need to understand what is he or she saying between the lines. What does that really mean? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of that statement? Or you have to take into consideration social norms. How do I behave in this situation? What does my body language tell about me or the other person? Or you have to take into consideration history. What can I say, what I can't say based on where I am or what's happened before? So all this silent knowledge that you've been able to gain while you've been living here for decades is crucially important for you to understand what people mean when they say certain things. Whereas computers, they are very good with exact information, but not very well-defined information. That's very difficult. It requires interpretation. So quite naturally, we're good at different things. So the comparison between humans and computers is quite artificial because they are not coming to take something from us. Of course not. I mean, Google didn't come to take jobs from you. You are not fighting against Google. You're using Google. You're using it for your benefit. So we need to understand that computers, they are naturally good with skills such as locating knowledge. Like they find patterns in big data mass very easily. That's wonderful, right? They're good at eliminating biases. They have endless capacity, things that we just can't beat them at. So it's quite clear that, okay, let them do that. But we humans are naturally good at other things. We like to speculate about dilemmas and values. We can talk about abstract things. We have imagination. We have the ability to dream, have a vision, right? So whenever we make comparisons, we need to be quite exact about what we're talking about. If we just say, oh, the computers are better than humans, I would say, what do you mean? The best AI in the world is still far from the capabilities that a squirrel has. Because squirrel has instincts. It can survive in the nature, right? That's pretty cool. But AI, well, on the other hand, has gotten into a university. The squirrel hasn't. So we always need to kind of be specific about what we are comparing. We have many different types of intelligences. So it's not just better or worse. But in general, I would say this is a good trend. They will force us to be or do things that come naturally for us. So again, a good thing. So this is now what we should be developing then. This is human kind of capabilities, human skills that our future really depends on. But the difficulty here is, if you look at these skills, you might be wondering, well, how do we teach these things? Because these are quite abstract. How do you make a test for compassion? How do you make a test for curiosity? Well, it doesn't work like that because we don't have right and wrong answers. When it comes to mathematics, we have right and wrong. When it comes to grammatics, we have right and wrong. When it comes to resilience, we don't have right and wrong. We don't have universal teaching materials for that, so we can't make tests for that. And because we humans are so that we develop what we can measure. Now the challenge is we should still be putting resources, really focusing on skills that we won't get results from, at least with the traditional methods, traditional ways of defining competence. So it is a leadership problem in a way. I mean, if a young person comes to a job interview and says, I'm creative, I'm curious, I'm empathetic, everybody would want a person like this to work for them. But this young person can't have anything to show, anything to validate that claim. Everybody can say that. But how do you know that it's true? We already know that if a doctor is empathetic towards the patient, and there's a lot of research about this, the patient gets better soon. So a good interaction, good communication really does wonders. But how long usually are the visits to the doctor? It's about 15 minutes, at least in Finland. So I could say that, well, 15 minutes, it's not enough. We need 30 minutes because empathy requires time. We need to have, peace. So somebody could say, well, but why would we do that per two? 15 minutes is more efficient for the system. We get 4 in an hour because it's very difficult to, show empathy in numbers. This is how much it will, give us advantage. So it's very difficult to put these in numbers. The most important things you can't see in the GDP. The level of passion of teachers, for example, the trust, resilience. These things are very difficult to materialize. So let's make sure that even though we can't see these in numbers so easily, we don't forget them. Because already I can see that we value more speed than depth, which is a shame. We want to have quick speed. Where are you in 1 year? What happens in 3 years? What's the goal? But we might be going the wrong direction, and then the speed doesn't really help us at all. We need to make the world better, not just more efficient. There is a difference there. I mean, I could make shops and libraries and banks very efficient. Robots could run them already. It wouldn't be even that hard, right? We would save a lot of money that way. But will those become better? I wouldn't say so, because we want to have somebody to look us in the eye when we go to the library. We want somebody to greet us in the bank and so on. And we have seen that with Teams and Zoom, right? It's more efficient, right? But it's not better. So we need to understand the difference. Are we doing digital things just because it's optimized? Or is it actually becoming better? So there's a nuance there. A question to all of you. What can I get from you that I can't get from Google? In the information age that we're living in, you are kind of valued, you're only as valuable as the information you have to deliver. That's kind of the measuring stick. So what can I get from you that I can't get from Google? Why would I come to you? Well, you can look me in the eye. You can look me, or you can touch me on the shoulder. You have a body language. You breathe. You are present, right? Google has all the information, but it doesn't care. It doesn't have a personal opinion. So we just have to kind of verbalize what are the capabilities, what do we have that will become important in the future. And we need to also change the way we ask questions. I mean, if I ask at school, let's say, What's the capital of the United States, right? There's one right answer, many wrong answers. And it creates a situation that somebody in the class feels very good about themselves. I know, teacher, look at me. Then there are the people who don't know, and they feel bad about themselves. Like they try to avoid the eye contact, right? Then there are certain people who think they know, but they're wrong, and they say, like Minnesota, and then others laugh at them. Just the type of question creates this culture, right, in the class. But if I change the question, because I can get facts from Google easily, what's the capital, right? But if I change the question, what's the most important city in the United States? I take out the right and wrong answer dilemma, right? You can say anything to this question, but you have to say why. You can say Los Angeles because it's most well known, right? Or you can say New York, it's the center of economics. You can say Washington, D.C., because that's where the politics are. But it's all about how you argue in favor of that. And that's a skill. If I ask Google, what is the most important city? They don't have an opinion. They haven't lived. They haven't formed opinion, a perspective. So just by changing the question to a question that I can't get an answer from Google would be a big help already. What this will mean, what kind of this freedom to educate and find new knowledge online and so on, what this will kind of result in is that the way our lives from now on will change. The traditional work life was something like this. So we did things in certain order, and we did the things at the same time, each, class. But nowadays, obviously, it's not like that anymore, because it has changed. Now, we can't guarantee that with this degree you will, have a job for the next 30, 40 years. We have much more uncertainty. The old way was much nicer because we had a sense of control. If you do this, this is what will happen. There are certain good and secure jobs that you can have, and you can always affect your own future with the choices you're making. But in today's world, obviously, even if you did everything right, and as people suggested, still there might be changes, there might be pandemics, whatever, that will completely change your career path. So this requires much more uncertainty, the kind of capabilities to cope with it. And adaptability, as it was mentioned earlier in the stage as well. Now, we need to be careful that we don't create the successful people of the past just because it worked for us and we think it works for you as well. One older gentleman once told me that Perttu, no matter what happens in the world, two things will never go away. People will always fight it with each other, and people will always get sick, right? So a lawyer, a doctor, those are good jobs. And obviously, it made sense, it sounded nice, but he hadn't taken into consideration the developments in AI. Where is AI going first? Well, the doctor and the lawyer, right? So there just aren't secure jobs anymore. I mean, if you think the world 50 years ago, or even further, let's say before 100 years and before that, the lives the parents had and their children, they were almost identical. They did the same things in the same order, same manner. Oftentimes, even the profession was carried out to the next generation. But if you now think you and your children are the next generation, you can't even compare those life paths. They are not identical anymore. There's not much anything similar in that. I mean, when I was a kid, I had internet, I had smartphone, I had laptops. My parents didn't. Completely different environment in which we were brought up. So if you take a big perspective and look what the environment is right now and what it has been in the past, it's quite mind-boggling to put thousands of years and 30 years next to each other. What do I mean about this? Well, for thousands of years, what was change like? Change was linear, right? Because if one person wanted to do things differently, they told the other person. That told the other person. And, the information traveled as fast as the horse was able to run. So that was kind of the limitations. We didn't have scalable viral phenomena. So it was very predictable, the change. Where will it be in that time, in that time, in that time? So linear change, but also local change. So even though the change could have, traveled all around the world, slowly and steadily, it still didn't. Because usually it was limited to local communities, for our cities, our villages, our country borderlines, or geographics, right? So the idea we had didn't actually go to the other side of the world. So people were developing things unaware of each other, right? So the change for thousands of years has been linear and local. For the last 30 years, has it been linear? Obviously not. It's accelerating, it's exponential, isn't it? Has the change been local? Obviously not. It's global now. So from linear to exponential, from local to global change. And we've had it only for about 30 years, after World Wide Web, or hyperglobalization, as they said, in the 90s. So what has this changed? Now, how did we learn new skills in the past? In the old world, it was quite clear that, of course, parents teach their children, always. From dads to sons, from mothers to daughters, right? So every generation kind of accumulated that knowledge a bit, and they told it forward to the next generation. So it was kind of tradition, right? We tell what's important in life, and we help the next generation, and they will get they will get adults, and then they will tell it forward. Now, when this change happened, this tradition broke down as well, because now the older generation, they had a lot of knowledge that they weren't able to transfer anymore to the next generation. I mean, probably quite many of you have some years ago, you have been rewinding the cassette tape, right? You have been using the rotatable landline phone sometime in the history, right? You have used the paper map, or these types of things that were essential to know in order to survive in the world that you had, right? But it's completely useless to tell the teenager about the rotatable landline phone or how to rewind the cassette tape. Like, lots of knowledge, lots of competence, we could not move forward anymore. But at the same time, the young people, they were brought up in a completely different world, and they were not able to ask help from their parents. Like, a 5-year-old can't ask, "Hey, grandma, what apps did you use when you were a kid?" Well, the grandma wouldn't know, we didn't have them. If the teenager asks, "Hey, dad, what did it feel like when you were bullied online, as a teenager?" The dad would never know. So we kind of grew separate, grew apart. And because the new environment was such different, the older generation, they had to kind of unlearn many things in order to understand how these devices and platforms, everything work. Whereas the younger generation, they took it for granted. This is everything they knew. And they were a bit faster in adapting all those new ways of communicating and using these devices, which has resulted now in a situation where these younger people are teaching their parents. So it has gone the other way around. I mean, teenagers are telling their parents how to use the phone, right? Teenagers are telling their grandparents how to find settings in laptop and what to do there. And these are, again, essential things to know in order to survive in the future. But it's not going from the older generation to the younger one, but the other way around. Now, have we ever had a moment like this in history where this has even been possible? That fundamental knowledge is being transferred from the bottom up, not the other way around. I mean, of course, young children have always taught their parents, but in this kind of scale, has this ever been possible before? So probably not. And what this means is we need to rethink what expertise is and what education, what mentorship is. You can have a 17-year-old today who is, let's say, a YouTuber, knows everything about social media, knows everything about the algorithms, what to do, what not to do on YouTube. So I could say that 17-year-old is the best social media consultant in the country, by far. Nobody is equally good. But if I told this to somebody, they would wonder, like, Perttu, this person doesn't look like an expert. They don't sound like an expert. Like, a teenager doesn't wear the clothes that experts wear. Nothing about them reminds us that this is the best one in the country, because we have a very strict image in our head what expertise still should look like and sound like. So it might be a difficult thing for us to understand that there's a lot of potential, a lot of competence, a lot of skills, even though it doesn't come in a form that we have gotten used to. But because they are the first generation, first Google generation, they might have something that it's impossible to have for older people. So we need cross-generational dialogue. We need to really help each other because we have different strengths. Older people have, they have experience. They know what's important, what is the depth, what we need. Younger people, they have the ability to take risks. They are energetic, they have opinions, good. But we need both. The challenge here is that the demographics, well, let me ask it this way. How many people in the world are less than 30? The answer is over half. Now, if you look around, does it look like that? No, we are in a bubble. We don't realize that every other person should be under 30. And actually, in a couple of years, only in a couple of years, more than half of the population on Earth has been born in the 21st century. Think about that. Only in a couple of years, there's more 2000-something born people than any other people. So I will be in a minority as well at that time. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that we need to cooperate, right? Do you remember the time before the internet, by the way? I mean, of course you remember. You're over 30. But think of it this way. If you remember the time before internet, you will go down as the last people ever in the history of Earth that has that experience. Because I'm 1 year younger than the World Wide Web. I'm 26. So anybody after me, they will never know. And I don't know. But this just kind of the magnitude of this phenomenon. It's very interesting to be alive in this time. I was at my friend's place in Myanmar, and there was a little girl who said that I want, for my birthday present, I want this gift, a factory on a desk. Factory on a desk, and nobody knew what this girl was talking about. Like, what is this toy? And somebody realized, oh, she's talking about 3D printers. She just doesn't know the word for that. So then we whispered, okay, it's a 3D printer. And she ran to her mom, grandparents, hey, I want a 3D printer for my birthday. And the parents didn't know what it is. Like, they didn't have any way to respond to the enthusiasm that the girl had. And I was just looking from afar thinking, is it really, are we going to grow apart? We don't know the world. It's impossible for us to really see the world through somebody else's eyes. It's difficult, but we really need to collaborate. So, in all, or to sum it up, the world is uncertain. It will remain that way, and even in the future, this is a big kind of change we have just seen, and we're kind of still figuring it out. How should we develop education? How should we, prepare them for the future? Even we don't know. It makes it very humble, right? How do we know? But in that world where there is a lot of uncertainty, I would say that human skills, those are the things that will never go out of fashion. I mean, if there's some things that don't change, that's what you should build on, because investment in that won't go in vain. And the human skills, I'm pretty sure that it will always remain. I once asked a futurist in Silicon Valley, Ray Kurzweil, who is the head of technological development at Google, and I asked him, if you were my age, 20-something, what would you go to study? And because he's a futurist, I was expecting an answer like, well, quantum computers or synthetic biology or something hot, trendy, blockchain. And he didn't say that. He told me that there's no use, no sense to study anything else right now than philosophy or fine arts. Because character, thinking skills, that will help you throughout your life. Of course you can study coding, but a couple of decades, machines will write code by themselves, so it won't last forever. Of course, Mandarin Chinese, you should speak it, but a couple of years you will translate languages to your earbuds simultaneously. So it will come and go. But if you really want to help yourself, start with your character, thinking skills, humane skills. So that's kind of when I got the confirmation, okay, this is really what we need. Now we just need to update the way to validate, the way to test, the way to measure and value these skills, because they are the core. But with this, thank you very much for this opportunity, and looking forward to your questions and comments at the end of the session. So, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that, Perttu. And as you've said, we'll take questions at the end of the session after our next speaker, who is Borhen Shakrun, who's the Director for Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO. And he's an engineer and has a PhD in Education Sciences from Bourgogne University in France. His academic work focuses on the certification and validation of prior learning. He's worked as a trainer, as a chief trainer, as a VET project manager, and also as a short-term consultant for the EU, the World Bank, and other international organizations before coming to the European Training Foundation, where he worked as senior human capital development specialist and team leader of the EU-funded regional project Education and Training for Employment. And he's now the head of the TVET section at UNESCO and is leading the implementation of the UNESCO TVET strategy adopted in 2009. Borhen, over to you.
Thank you and good morning, guten Morgen. That bio is a bit outdated, which is fine. I think it's good that I'm going back to the future, if I can say so. And thanks to the organizers, it's very challenging to speak after the futurists. But I would like to speak about the past to go to the future. And part of the discussion I would like to take is based on experience. There is something that seems to me an important aspect to take into account is that we are all learning. And part of what we'll be sharing today, probably you have lived it also during the last 2 years. Maybe what I can do first is to, I think it's important that when we are speaking about concepts, we try at least to unpack them. And obviously, the Chair, you mentioned about resilience and how do we understand resilience. We have different definitions. Most of them are how we cope with shocks, with disruption. What I like in the definition is that while in some definition is about building back, some were about building back better, and some were about building back differently. And I like this definition of building back differently, because if we are building back, then we are going to the status quo. If we are building back better, we are trying to improve something. But if we are building back differently, then we are envisaging something different. And I think it's very important that we look at that. The second aspect is that probably every part of the society, economy, the world has to be resilient. But when we come to education, the center of the resilience should be, are we building learners who are resilient? And how we are doing that? Probably we need to think about how we are building resilient learning ecosystem. And I will come back to that later. We need governments. We need whole of government approach and policies that are resilient, that can cope with the challenges and can cope with the shocks and build differently. But we need also an international community that is solidar, that works together, that advances an agenda. And from a perspective of UN, the Sustainable Development Goal 4 for education remains the compass and remains the direction that we would like to take. But obviously, education is part of a broader sustainable development agenda, and the resilience of the international community has to be about the sustainability, and part of it is related to climate, part of it related to poverty, but part of it is related to gender equality, about equity, about inclusion, about social cohesion, and other matters that are important for all of us, and that are important for the social contract that we have. But I would like to share with you an experience and share a bit the doubt that I have, the uncertainty that we have to cope with, but also what we have learned from this uncertainty. Here is a situation where in February 2020, we have seen how the education system, the global education system shut down. We were observing. We have seen it started from 200 million young people who are out of school, to 300, to 700, to 1.6 billion learners who are out of school. And we were observing, and we needed to react. Of course, the question is, did we have the skills? Did we have a strategy? No, we didn't have a strategy. We didn't have a strategy. We were all trying to understand what is happening and trying to cope with it. But we had principles. Let me mention 3 of them. First, equity matters. Second, solidarity matters. Third, partnership matters. And that's what drives our action. We were trying to see how we can collaborate, how we can learn together, how we can do together. And that's what we have done with the other partners. First, we have continued looking at data and evidence. We continued observing what is happening, how countries are closing or opening, where is the problems, where are the issues. We also engaged in the policy dialogue. For the first time, Japan minister was interested in what Mozambique is doing. France minister was interested in what is happening in Peru. Italy ministry at the time wanted to know what countries are doing. We all needed this policy learning, this peer learning, because we had to cope with the new challenge that we never faced before. We needed to share knowledge. We have done it in education, but obviously we need to do that in science, in health, in other matters. And if you listen to the South African colleagues today, they're complaining. They're saying, well, we shared the knowledge, and now you're putting a ban on us. And I think it's very important that we are clear about the solidarity and the collaboration that we want to have. We don't punish. We have to share and share knowledge. But we also mobilize it for action, because part of the observation we are having is that connectivity was a problem, even in the most advanced economies. Getting out of school was a problem because school is not only about learning, it's about socialization, it's about integration, it's about health, it's about nutrition. And that's about equity. And third is that it's a problem that doesn't require only action of a Minister of Education. It's not an education problem only. Connectivity requires telecom companies. Nutrition requires other services. So it needed an international coalition of partners. And that's what we have done. We have moved to mobilize partners with an objective to leave no one behind, with an objective that learning should continue in different forms, using different channels, high tech, low tech, no tech, mobilizing different partners that can cope with those challenges. This happens at the country level, but it happens at the regional and at the global level. And that's what we have been trying to do, and try to bring together a coalition which is now around 200 partners, from UN, government organization, to civil society, to private sector, to media, to researchers, to tech industries. Because we need all these partners to be mobilized around the table to deliver on the promise of leaving no one behind. And because it required different ways of doing online learning, teacher training, curricula and instructional design, strategies to cope with the reopening or closing schools, sanitary protocols. All those required much more than an action of a Ministry of Education. It requires Minister of Health, Minister of Telecom. And I think very important as part of the resilience is that a resilience cannot be one piece or one element of a system. It has to be systemic. And it takes these multi-stakeholders dimension. So we have launched this coalition to support countries, and we tried to, and again, what I'm presenting here is a structuring after the action. We didn't have a structure of how we will proceed. We're acting almost on a daily basis. But we ended to structure our work around how we can support countries' intervention and how countries can respond to the crisis. And we identified 3 flagships. We call them flagships, meaning 3 areas where it requires more attention. One on issues related to connectivity and digital learning, the second about teachers, and the third about gender, because from the past we knew that gender matters, and that in many contexts and many countries that we will face issues related to women and girls, for example. So that's an aspect that we have been working on. And the last pillar of our work was about knowledge sharing and knowledge building. It's about doing surveys. It's about understanding how countries are responding and sharing that on a regular basis through webinars, through different actions that we were taking. But it's also about advocacy for education, so that education is high in the agenda of the policymakers. When you are coping with uncertainty, when you have to act now, probably health is the most important aspect. But we have seen that attention to education is also a matter of policy and policy commitment. Some countries who didn't have a high level of contamination were closing their schools. They were closing their schools first. And our call was to say, you close schools last, and you open them first. It's a bit strange that you open a supermarket first, and you close the schools. So the call for keeping the schools open in a safe manner was a call that we have, and we have taken the responsibility for it. And saying that schools is not only for learning, is much more than that. It's about different skills that you were mentioning earlier. It's about those skills and cohesion that can bring us all together. We have achieved things, and I don't want to take more time on that, but just to say that we have been working everywhere, responding to demands from different countries, for different contexts. Some countries needed teacher training and technology skills, remote learning pedagogies. But others needed more than that. They needed devices, they needed connectivity. Others needed to set up from scratch a platform, an online learning platform. Some needed to set up a radio and TV. That's the case of DR Congo, for example. They didn't have any online platform. In any case, internet penetration is very low. But what they needed good quality radio and TV. They used the basic technology, the traditional technology. And it's the reality in our world, is that half of the humanity is not connected to broadband. And we need to keep this in mind. And we need to take this into consideration. But even in OECD countries, we have populations that are not connected. Or when they are connected, they have one device at home. And that connection is low quality. So we need to keep this equity and inclusion dimension, and that not all of us are connected to high broadband and have the best condition for learning at home. I wanted just to take a case to illustrate a bit also how we moved from response to recovery to resilience building, just to explain a bit from the experience and the challenge that we are facing. It's an experience that we launched in Western Africa. It covers 10 countries. And it's about putting at disposal of countries an online platform that connects to the national platform and that offers educational resources. But what is interesting in the experience is not the online platform itself or the technology that we have used it for, but it's more for me the process and how we are working toward resilience building. Let me start with the response. It was about leveraging whatever we had, putting educational resources that are available, having them, for example, in this case, in French language, having them available to teachers who would be able to use them to reach out to their learners. Most of it was about putting at disposal a platform and some resources and accompany teachers in using them. But and that was basically the ambition we had. And of course, you can criticize it now. You say, why are we putting for countries who not necessarily, where French language is second language, you are putting resources in French? Why are you putting a regional platform where you need to have a national platform? Why are you using technology that probably is covering just part of the... But I think that's what we have been doing all. We are trying to respond with the way we could respond. But as we moved from response to recovery, we have started building part of the system, training more teachers, helping countries to develop education resources, helping countries to link their national platform with a regional platform, with a spirit of cooperation and peer learning. And that's, I think, the importance of what we have been advancing is no country in the world can cope alone. We need to cooperate. We need to share knowledge. And this event is part of it. is how we can share what we have learned, how we can build something different together. And that's part of the global resilience that we are trying to do. The last is about resilience. And of course, resilience is about different components. It's about teacher training. It's about more building educational resources that are localized. We don't want people to all the world to learn in English. Everybody wants to learn in his or her own language. We need resources with identity that are built with the national curriculum, that are built with the national perspective, being a global citizens. But we have to cope also with the national constraints. And I think the resilience is part of how we are building that. Now, having this experience and the learning, so where to go from that? And what is the future we are discussing? How we go to this more human revolution? And I think it's important that we discuss internationally and with the audience like yours, where do we want to go? And the question is, do we have a vision? At least internationally. Is it a vision that we are sharing? And is it a vision that we can engage with? We just published a work on the futures of education or futures of learning. And we put it in plural because there is no one future, but probably we have different futures. And the question is, do we react to it or do we shape it? And from my point of view, our role is to shape it. And it is part of it related to what's the desire that we have as a humanity to go forward. And I'm referring also to an important work that the International Labour Organization has done on the future of work. We cannot disentangle or we cannot put the relationship between education and work without looking at how the interplay happens. And there are common denominators. That we need a human-centered vision. That we look at lifelong learning for all. And lifelong learning is not adult learning. It's from early learning to adult learning. And today, in some of the societies, it's about senior people who continue learning. It's not because you are out of the labor market that you stop learning. You can live 30 years. Japan just adopted a strategy for lifelong learning. This was called the 100 life cycle. So, it's 100 life cycle. We cannot stop learning, and we will not stop learning because we retire. We continue learning, and it's important that the society, that education system, that training system, take this into consideration. And of course, it's about sustainability of our economies and societies. In the futures of education work, we have focused on 5 dimensions that we think are important in this transformation of education. The first is about the pedagogies and then how we can learn differently and how we can cope with these different learning settings. And something that we are still bad in doing it is how we can connect the different learning settings and what pedagogies can drive that. We learn in the workplace, and we are in a country that is illustrated by its dual system, so learning in the workplace. But we don't learn only in the workplace, we learn in internet, we learn by interaction. And it's very important that the pedagogies evolve and that the science of learning evolves as well. The second is about curricula, and curricula understood in a broad sense. It's not only curricula in schools, but it's this learning journey, learning pathways, and how we build them, how we make them responsive to the needs of the learners, and how they build those skills that you were mentioning earlier and that are important. But there are other skills that we need. And unfortunately, we have to be aware that in many education systems, we still have kids that are ending schools without learning or without acquiring the foundational skills. We have children that drop out. We have people that leave education system without a basic qualification. So it's very important that we take that into consideration. Teaching and how we teach will have to change. The schools until now, and we have been using almost a very old model of schools, is that you go, you have a teacher, you have a place, you have a classroom, you have a timetable. Probably school will have to remain because it's a place of integration. But school as we know it will have to evolve. And is that, we are speaking already about hybrid learning, but probably we need to speak about other forms of learning and this connection between different learning settings. And the last is learning in all areas of life, and I think it's very important, and you mentioned that earlier, but I feel that this is something that we're still bad in it. We're still bad in connecting those learning, in recognizing and valuing the learning. Take just the validation of prior learning. When you look at the systems, they are so sophisticated, but when you look at the numbers, there are very few people who go through the validation of prior learning, including the most advanced countries like Portugal or France. So we still have, and not to speak about other countries, so we still have to do a lot in connecting those learning settings, in valuing the learning in different settings, in valorizing it, and in building it for future learning. So do we have Do we have a vision? I think we have a vision. It's about building a new social contract for education. We will need to unpack it. We need to make it happen. But we need to move from a social contract for education that is 200 years old to a new social contract for education. Do we have a process for building it? It's a bit complicated slide, but I wanted to highlight 3 elements that I think are important for building a resilient learning ecosystem. First of all, we need to think about the ecosystem design and enhancement, and how we build this learning ecosystem that is inclusive. The second, we need to be aware about the key actors. Who will enable, who will make this happen? And then, who are the enablers? What will be the enablers for a resilient learning ecosystem? What matters from my point of view is, first of all, are we able to map stakeholders that have to be involved in the learning ecosystem? And it's not only schools, it's not only ministries of education, it's much broader stakeholders. It's civil society, it's private sector, it's other stakeholders that have to be involved. We need to build a vision for learning ecosystem. And what do we want to achieve? And from my point of view, and from what we have as an agenda, is about an inclusive learning ecosystem. We need to empower the key stakeholders, in particular teachers. Teachers in a broader sense. Teacher in the classroom, but it can be tutor, it can be coach, it can be peer learning and peer learners. So it's about empowering the people who will engage in the teaching and learning process. We need to create collaborative and enabling environment. And last, we need to have a policy learning dimension. Policy learning meaning how we learn from the experience, how we monitor progress, how we make an education system and learning ecosystem a learning organization. And that's something that we tend to neglect. We tend to think about how the institution works as a bureaucracy, but we underestimate the importance of institutions as a learning organizations. We need to think about the actors and the beneficiaries' resilience, but also government policies. Government have responsibilities. They have to have clear policies. It's about strategies, it's about regulation, because we have to regulate. We have to regulate access to data of learners. We have to regulate the use of artificial intelligence, and we just published a recommendation on ethics in using artificial intelligence. It's very important that we regulate. It doesn't mean that we prevent the creativity and innovation, but we have ethical responsibility, is that we have to protect the learners. We have to protect their data. We have to protect the learning processes from interferences. And we have to have a better understanding of how the algorithms work. It's about data literacy. It's about artificial intelligence literacy. And it can start from basic thing, understanding what is an AI. But it can go to the highest level of understanding how the algorithms work. So it's very important that there are policies. There are government, public policies that define the way we work. And of course, it's about providers' contribution. It's about editors, it's about creators, and we have a bunch of them outside of this room. And they are important, because they can drive innovation, they can drive creativity. And again, it's not only about public sector, but it's about others. But we can be guided, for example, by open educational resources. It's something that we can share, we can build together. It's not something that is commercial. And it's important that we take into consideration this openness, open educational resources, open science, open learning. This is what can drive cooperation and solidarities. Let me finish with the enablers. Some of them are related to how the system level can learn, but some of them are about issues related to the partnership or to the technology infrastructure, how the technology infrastructure is built and how it is built to be resilient to change and to shocks. But it's about also financing. And the question is, do we have the resources for this transformation and resilience building? Not too much. When we looked at how much resources are allocated to education in the stimulus packages, which is something once-in-generation investment that countries are doing, taking debts as a crazy that we couldn't imagine before the COVID. Only less than 3% of the resources in the stimulus packages, in the recovery packages, are allocated to education. Of course, there are variations across countries. But if the once-in-generation investment is not triggered to investing in education, because investing in education is investing in the economies and societies of the future. What you invest today will determine what economy and what society you will have. But the data are showing us that we have very little resources allocated to education and training globally. And the 3% is the global, meaning most of them are OECD countries. When we take the OECD countries, it's less than 1%. So the countries who are already lagging behind before the COVID, in terms of the learning crisis, will not get the resources for them to advance. And it's a cry, it's a voice that we would like to express, is that we need resources to be allocated to education. We need resources to be allocated to leave no one behind. And for now, what we can see is that those resources are not there. Do we have a mechanism for it? At least from a UN, we have a sustainable development goal for a steering committee that is trying to advance a global agenda, that is trying to advance international cooperation and solidarity, building the vision that I mentioned earlier, and working together in a cooperation and solidarity. Is that sufficient? No, because this is about institutional mechanism. But we need networks, we need platforms, we need peer learning, we need community of practices. Today, teachers can exchange not only in Germany, they can exchange with Korea, they can exchange with Salvador. Is that international communities, that international networks, cooperation, solidarity that is important? And we have some of them. We have UNESCO chairs, for example. We have Univoc network. We have schools networks. And it's very important that platform like this one, platform that can engage in more cooperation, knowledge sharing, learning together is set up. And that's my call to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Borgen. We've now got, I think, about 15 minutes for some questions, and I'm sure there are plenty of questions on both of those contributions, and if you haven't got any questions, I certainly have. So who would like to ask? Yes, in the second row here. Just wait for the microphone, and if you could introduce yourself, please, as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Rodrigo. I actually recently graduated, so I have more experience being a student than anything else. And right now, I'm doing with my two partners some research into blended and hybrid learning in the context of an art academy. I graduated with a design course. And I have a question for Bert. I hope I'm pronouncing your name somewhat correctly. So yeah, at some point you were talking about these differences between human thinking and computer thinking, and you pointed out that we, unlike computers, are able to form critical opinions and justify them. And I felt like being a bit stubborn, so I asked Google, what is the most important city in the United States? And it said, it's first New York, and then Los Angeles, and then San Francisco. And then I clicked the tiny button that says learn more, and it told me a very brief explanation and vague explanation that it's from popularity and population and a bunch of other factors. Basically what I want to get to is that, of course, computers are not able to come up with critical opinions by themselves. But as we know, we use technology, especially the internet, and also artificial intelligence, and basically our opinions and human biases are easily transferred to that technology, which can, as we have seen with the rise of, dangerous conspiracy theories or pseudo-scientific beliefs or extreme political views, those can be dangerous because we tend to associate things that we see in Google or on the internet or wherever as a bit authoritative opinions. So I wanted to ask you, as somebody who works with technology, and also because you were speaking for a positive future where technology actually drives us forward. I wanted to ask you your opinions on these issues and how can we use, especially communication technology, also in teaching, in a way that does not contribute to this polarization and divide, but how can we harness that towards a more positive result?
Thank you very much. Great question. I think two things we have to kind of note here. The fact that we have gotten access to information because of Google, because of internet, doesn't mean that we would have become better with that information. So information revolution was not curiosity revolution. So if we only use the internet to kind of strengthen what we already think and believe in, of course it's a very bad tool in that case. And you have to understand that the business models that are behind YouTube, Google, and others, their goal is not to educate us. Their goal is to make us satisfied. So when you search something, it's not giving you opposite information or kind of trying to fact check you, but it's giving you what you want. So it's very important to know that if somebody says, hey, a 7-year-old has a Google in their pocket, they have more access to information than any president in 30 years. It is true, yes. Any president, any leader a couple of decades ago did not have access to that kind of information instantaneously, but the 7-year-old doesn't know what to do with that information. So if, for example, I write a poem and a computer writes a poem and they're equally good, both are very, very good, only I can tell a story behind that poem. I can say that I went to a mountaintop, I was looking at the scenery, thinking of my childhood and wrote this poem. And this story, the background, kind of gives more color to the poem. So when somebody reads this poem and knows the background, it's more it's richer. So my point is, even though we got the same result or the same kind of outcome, only humans can give meaning to the information, meaning to the end result. So we are very good at kind of giving purpose to things. And I think this is very interesting, very, very important to note here that the information itself is not much all, but giving the meaning, the purpose to it is very important.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. Yes, Brian.
Thanks for the great presentations. I'm Brian Mulligan from IT Sligo in Ireland. In regards to your analysis, Perttu, I sort of feel that you're looking at it from the point of view of, if we assume that our computers are going to do a lot of what we did before in the past, if information technology is going to do that, what role do we have? And I'm not sure that that's an immediately useful analysis. I mean, when you look at these future skills, to some extent these are skills that we always needed. Okay, so they're not particularly future skills. But if you look at the state of the world at the moment, there is a bunch of big problems that we have to solve. We don't have a problem with food. We don't have a problem with manufactured goods. Fine. We have a huge problem with climate, with energy, with inequality, both within countries and between countries. there is probably quite a short list of big problems that we have to solve. If we come at it from this angle in terms of what are these future skills, and we look at it in terms of the immediate future, and when I say the immediate future, I mean, by the way, 20 to 30 years, because it's 25 years ago since I started imagining how online learning would change the world. And it hasn't changed it very much in 25 years. So if we look at these immediate problems, it seems to me that the skills that we need are engineers, scientists, social scientists to worry about the sort of polarization of politics, that there are big immediate problems, and that's how we should see, or what skills we need. Thanks very much.
I agree very much, because obviously technology is the easy part here. Humans are difficult. You know, we don't understand humans well enough, I would say, in order to use the technology for good reasons. The thing with technology is that we can give one person very much power in a very quick time. In one night, you can get millions of followers, millions of people in the audience. But in one day, you can't make a person compassionate. In one day, you can't make a person friendly or, you know, give them good ethics. So there is a slight chance that with these powerful technologies, we can do great things, but because we humans haven't really understood exactly the human social elements yet well enough, we use the technology for bad reasons or for bad things. So I would say that we need to concentrate on the human element more in order to use the technology for good.
Bohen, you wanted to add something?
No, but I think that technology helps us fix the problems that you are mentioning. Just to give an example, for example, and it's about climate change and energy use. Artificial intelligence and data analytics were used in a city like Abidjan to manage better the traffic and transport. So the technology can help us advance an agenda that is our global agenda about sustainability. The question is more, are we able as a human being to, first of all, agree about what is the ethical use of technology? What do we want to use the technology for? And are we able to regulate that internationally? Because one of the concerns is that we may be using artificial intelligence in an ethical manner in Germany, but in another country, it will be used differently. It will be used to attack. It's a weapon. So the question is how globally we can come to some of the agreements. So I think definitely we need to solve the problems that we are facing as humanity. And technology is probably part of the solution and part of the problem, because the energy, the technology requires energies. The bitcoins are using a huge number of megawatts. So the question is how this we can balance. But I feel that is how we can come together to solve those problems, because some of those problems we will not be able to solve them at a country level. And it's about how we ethically can use technology, how we can share, how we can build capacities, because there are inequalities within and across countries, as you mentioned. And and I finish with this, when we were discussing the ethics in artificial intelligence recommendation among member states, of course there were concerns related to ethics, but there was also concerns related to, there are big investment by some countries in artificial intelligence, and others have no cent to invest in artificial intelligence. So we are going to rather deepening this divide between the ones who are advanced and the ones who are less advanced. And I think that's something that we have to take into account as well in our discussion.
Can I just ask you a follow-up question on that? Because it struck me when you were talking before, and you just mentioned now, can we agree about technology? But I wonder whether we can actually agree about education, and whether realistically you can actually create a global education coalition in the current circumstances in which, for instance, we live in an information age in which information is the most powerful commodity, knowledge is power, and increasingly education may, if you take a dark view of the future, education may become a battlefield, and to some extent it already is. We see conflicts where education is deliberately targeted, and where in an increasingly competitive environment, quite possibly it's actually education that is going to be a target for one power to degrade another power's capacity to educate its citizenry. And in those circumstances, I wonder whether you can actually, just as you were saying with technology, get an agreement about a common purpose in education at all.
Indeed, that's one of the challenges, and I see it from geopolitical, without going into details. But it's incredible that today, when we are speaking about human rights, sometimes I feel that the discussion is taking us back rather than to the future. And education is a human right. So if we are all together agreeing that this is a human right, we would need an education, and it's not only education, it's lifelong learning that is becoming a human right. Now, education is used also for the geopolitical confrontations. Take, for example, language learning, including in Europe. There are tensions regarding how to teach learning language minorities. So I think this is an aspect, but probably as an international community, we cannot regulate technology, at least from a UNESCO perspective. We will not be able to regulate technology because technology is evolving very fast. But we can at least agree on the common principles of equity, of inclusion, of rights. And those, it seems to me that we can advance them in a better shape than what we could expect in the technology matters. Is this interference or the integration of technology within education that probably will be something that we will have to cope with? And I must say, there are some different positions here. Some would say, okay, let's take the private sector, for example. Technology is driven by the private sector, and technology moved from the periphery to the center of education system. And that means that private sector and the tech companies move it from the periphery to the center. What should we do? There are two positions. Either we say, take them out, put them aside, or to say, these are part of the stakeholders, and we have to engage with them. It can be painful. It is challenging. It is a learning experience for us because we are not used to the business model of Google. And I have been together with my colleagues speaking with Google when we launched the coalition. But we are not used to, we don't even understand what is the business model of Google. So we have to learn it. We have to engage with it. And that's what will be my stance. We have to bring around the table all the stakeholders, engage with them, change the perspective. It is harmful. It is painful. It is not easy. But I believe that's the road to take.
Thank you. Yes, here, in the second row.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. Very quickly share a story. The planet Earth was floating around in space, and it bumped into another planet. And the other planet said, "How are you doing?" And Earth said, "Well, not so good. I've got a bad case of humans." And the other planet said, "Oh, don't worry, they don't last long." After your talk today, I think we're going to last a little bit longer. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for that. We've probably got time for another couple of quick questions. Anybody else? No?
There's one.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a quick question regarding young people in education, because what I gathered also from the talks is that it is important to have young people in education. And as someone who's in his 20s, I had a hard time getting into education because everyone asked me to have at least 5 years of work experience either in the field or in education. So, and my students have the same issue now, that they're looking for a job and they can't find one because they need at least 5 years of experience. But what is the sort of experience then that we're looking for? And well, I was just wondering, how can we make young people, how can we make our job sexy enough also so that people can apply for a position as a teacher, either in higher education or in secondary schools?
I think, coming back to my point about half of the population is under 30, what it means for work is that in 10 to 15 years, half of the population is coming to workforce, right? With huge amount, meaning that they are overrepresented pretty much everywhere. And if we want to succeed in anything, basically, we have to take into consideration what they want. They are paying customers, they are the workers, so we need to know what's kind of ticking with them, what is important for them. And I think right now we don't see people who are under 30 too much in places where we're making decisions. And I think in order to serve them better, we should take them, they are one stakeholders as well, take them into the table to talk and discuss what they really think is important for them, what they need. So my answer would be to make sure that we are enough diversity when we make changes, when we plan the future, what we will teach, what they will need in order to get the first place, in order to get the work they need. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
No, thank you. And I think it's an important aspect about the teachers and the role of teachers. We have been looking at the teachers as an actor in the education system. Sometimes they are even neglected in the decision making. And that's one of the challenges we see is how the teaching profession will change in the future. There are some basic principles that will remain. You want a teacher who is professional, who is engaged, who is motivated, who gets better salary, who is compared to salaries that he or she can get in the labor market at the same level will be a competitor. And that's what countries that have done better in education have achieved, countries like Finland, for example. But I think the teaching profession is also changing. And part of it is the impact of technology. There is a taboo that we have in the education system to say, artificial intelligence will not affect teachers' profession. It will. Probably, if we take the same example as we see in the labor market, the routine tasks will be taken by whatever automatization. But it's those skills that Peter was mentioning earlier that are important, is that understanding the needs of the learner, understanding the feeling, understanding the emotion, this passion for teaching and for accompanying teachers, learners to a new ground seems to me something that will remain part of our human and our human being. Now, on youth, I think there is a paradox that we are all speaking about youth involvement, not youth as beneficiaries, but youth as actors. But when you look at our governance of education system, we have very little youth representatives. Very little. Very few countries have institutionalized youth representation in the governance and the decision making. Very little countries. And youth are not homogeneous group. You have youth who are neets. You have youth who are highly educated. You have youth who are in middle class. So I think we need to take into account the diversity of youth and their needs. And the last piece, which I think is very important in our discussion, is that probably the teaching and learning will have to evolve. Some of it is related to what happens in the classroom, and probably this is not something that will change tomorrow morning, but things will change, and they might change very fast than what we have expected, particularly when it comes to the hybrid learning and the way countries are doing it. What is a bit in a paradox from our observations that when we look at how countries reopen schools, there are very little evidence that all this learning that happened through the COVID is taken into consideration in an institutional way. I mean, some countries, they reopen schools, they have organized some remedial learning, and they started the school year. Some have introduced some hybridization of learning, but very little. And at different stages, it's more in the university and upper secondary. In the basic education, nothing has changed. But we know that technology, our expectation might be that it moves fast, but it doesn't move fast. But at one point, it unfolds. And I think that's the aspect that we will need to observe is how much things will evolve faster, and probably we need to be resilient to those aspects. But I want to highlight that we, particularly regarding youth, we speak about their involvement in the governance, but in reality we have very little space that is created for youth to have a voice in the education system decision making, not as a beneficiaries.
Okay. To comment on that, I would say the biggest fear should not be of failure here, but rather succeeding in the wrong things. Because then we can say, oh, we went forward, we moved up very fast, but it didn't really matter at all. So in addition for students to be unemployed, they're also unemployable. So we need to really take into consideration what the youth thinks is important for them. One of the biggest reasons for dropout is the lack of motivation. It doesn't feel relevant. So let's hear them more.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm afraid we've run over time. I know we'd all like to continue this discussion, and maybe we can continue over that other essential item, coffee. But thank you to both our presenters, and thank you to all of you for what's been a really fascinating discussion.